And then subsequently, you know, there was a bookshop called the People's Bookshop. You can see it in that book that I gave you. And it was the only bookshop in Johannesburg. They were, dare I say it, they were Trotskyists who ran the bookshop. And they used to get books from all over the world, you know, Soviet books, Soviet novels, Chekhov and all the plays, and we used to all go. So Saturday mornings, that place was full of all of us getting reading books. So one day I was at the counter and I heard the lady say Vella had ordered a book apparently. What it was, and the lady at the counter said, "Terribly sorry, that book is out of print." I was standing quite near, because we haven't got that book anymore. So I said, "Oh, by the way," I said, "I've got that book, I can let you have it and I can lend it to you." And that was the beginning of a friendship, through the lending of a book. Interesting. Developed from there. And remember, he came from an Indian family who were looking for a lovely young lady for their son. In fact, they'd lined up. You know what families do, Timish? They go to weddings. At the weddings, they all look around at nice families, nice quote unquote. Oh, that's a nice girl from a nice family. They keep their eye on that family. Eventually, they try and do something. So I think there was an eye for some family for Vella. I think something was lined up for Vella. It's quite hard, though, to be married, and then we decided to get married, simply because in 1948, when I married Vella in June 1948, the government had just come into power in January of that year. Now, under Smuts' regime, and all before the Nationalist Party came to power, there was apartheid. For 100 years there's been apartheid, for years and years. It wasn't rubber stamped, but people didn't get married to each other. The law wasn't laid down in law, but you just didn't. We didn't. So when they came into power, the first thing on the statute book was the Mixed Marriages Act. I don't know why they did. They didn't have to do it because nobody was married. No, it's a myth, you know. It's a myth. No. Not many people intermarry. You don't meet, no chance. Anyhow, we decided the first reading, on the second reading, we better get ourselves married before the third reading, because once it's law, Vella, we might never be able to. If you're married outside the country, you couldn't come back. You could come back, but you weren't allowed to bring your spouse with you. We worked out that if you were married in the country, they couldn't keep you out. So that's why we got married while the third reading was being discussed. Yes, so that's in my poem I mentioned that the third reading. We got ourselves married. Secret, nobody knew. His parents didn't know. My family didn't know. Very few people knew. Very few people. We didn't advertise it. Kept it a secret. It's quite hard. It's quite hard to get married and not tell anybody, you know. Really hard. Harder than keeping official secrets, frankly, because you're dying to tell people, "Oh, I'm married," and you can't do it. It's like gay people. They can't come out because they will lose their jobs. I'm talking about long ago. They daren't come out. They couldn't come out. They wanted to and they couldn't. And the same with me. I wanted to come and I couldn't. So there you go. Hard work, but never mind. Once or twice I thought to myself, is it worth it? And I decided it was worth it. You know, you go through time thinking to myself, all these laws, you know, I would go to meetings and everybody would go out of, all the whites would go to Fanny Farmer's, the tea shop. Vella couldn't go. The black comrades couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't, so you went out. It was quite hard altogether. We have a relationship that's very hard. But in fact, Fanny Farmer's was a very lovely tea shop in Johannesburg. Lovely tea shop. Blacks were not allowed, or browns, but they had a little hole in the wall round the side where you went and you could get a cup of. They'd hand you a mug of tea. In fact, they wanted your money, but you couldn't come in. Interesting, hey? So it was hard work. So Vella used to go to Wits University. They had lectures in the morning before work. You should go to lectures between 8 and 9 and then go to work afterwards. So he'd go to the tram stop, and I knew which tram he was getting, and I would meet him at the tram stop in the morning. My husband would say, "Hello, how are you?" And that was it. Can you imagine? It was horrible, horrible. And in Johannesburg, the trams were such... Cape Town was more liberal, Tamish. Cape Town, the Cape colours were allowed to get on a bus. Johannesburg was the trams, you know, the trams had an outside. The conductor would run upstairs and see if there were 4 seats. If there were 4 seats, they could let 4 Indians in. There weren't any 4 seats. And sometimes I would think to myself, I hope there are no seats. Vella would stay a bit longer. Interesting. That was it. So I was working for this legal firm under my name on Friday. Came back on Monday. I was a married woman. I dare not tell them. Come on. Came back with a straight face and carried on my work. Till I left, and they gave me a very nice reference to say I was leaving the country. Because when you come abroad, people want to know why did you come abroad, and you have a very nice letter saying she's leaving the country of her own accord. I have got lovely references. I take them wherever I went. I took my references. You don't do it today. You don't have references. They just found out they write to your employer. That's what happens today. We couldn't get married in Johannesburg. So I wrote, Patimesh, if I'm worried about something, I write a poem and I get it out of my system. Sometimes writing a poem gets it right out and it cures me. So this is my poem. It happened in Joburg a long time ago when a letter arrived which troubled us so. It said, mixed marriages are not performed here. Till death us do part, and that's what we said on the day we got wed in that little old town once called Mafeking. 'Twas the 12th day of June in the year 48, when the whole of the country was filled with such hate, the government in power declaring its myths, we know we are right to keep our race white. The Mixed Marriages Bill on the statute book lay, but we got ourselves wed before it was read. How dare you defy the law of this land by marrying this man and holding his hand? But defy them we did, when he slipped on that ring in that little old town once called Mafeking. It's light-hearted, but it reflects the day of my marriage. Can you imagine? Can you imagine getting married with all these posters all over, Tamish? And your family not knowing and everybody not knowing. It's terrible, terrible. But I think of it now. But I got through it, thank goodness. You know, I should give you a copy of my marriage certificate, Indian and European. Vella's classified as an Indian, he's never been to India. I'm classified as a European, I've never been to Europe. But there you go, that's how it was. Vella was living at home and was not telling his family that he was married. And I wasn't living at home, but I wasn't telling my mother I was married. Didn't tell anybody, it was a secret to me. Mainly, I'll tell you why, because the law was coming and people didn't want to be associated. They thought you were breaking the law. Don't get me involved, please. So that was another reason. It wasn't just if in England you don't tell anybody, but that's when the law's against you. You've got to be careful. Immigration Act came a couple of years after the Mixed Marriages Bill. Although during the Smuts regime, you couldn't... Apartheid was there, but it wasn't rubber stamped. It was there all the time, 100 years. The Immigration Act came in 1950 something or other, where it is sex between black and white. I think they had 7 years in prison, and some lashes for the black partner had lashes, not the white partner. Pauline Naidu Was married to H.A. Naidu, got married in Durban, and then went to live in Cape Town, because they couldn't live in Durban. Cape Town was a bit more, races mixed a little bit more in Cape Town, because you had the Cape Coloureds, and then they had a daughter called Sandra. When Sandra was at nursery school, there was okay in Cape Town. They wouldn't allow her to join and go to school with a normal state school in South Africa. So they left the country. When your child couldn't go to the school, you know.
Yeah.
When I think of the Backler past, to me, frightening.